أكرر أيضا نلتقي مع 4 علماء من علماء اللغة، ونبدأ بالأستاذ الدكتور عبد الله الشناف. ولا أعتقد أن شخصية الأخ الدكتور عبد الله الشناف تحتاج إلى تعريف، وهو أستاذ علم المعاني في جامعة اليوم، ورئيس قسم الترجمة، ورئيس جمعية المترجمين الأردنيين، وهو دعباسة في العربية، ترجمة ومكتبة. وأنني أعتقد أن هذا الرجل قد نظر نفسه وحياته وفلوسه ووقت أولاده لخدمة العلم والعلماء. ومن هذا المنبر أكرر التحية والشكر له على جهوده المتميزة في خدمة اللغويات والترجمة والتعليم، وعلى وقته الثمين الذي يعطى للأحبة حيثما حل. وأنا أشبه الدكتور عبد الله بالماء والمطر، حيثما حل اخضرت وأينعت وازدهرت. والميكروفون مع الدكتور عبد الله الشناف يبدأ محاضرته، فليتفضل مشكورا. اوكي دكتور، ارجو الالتزام بالوقت، نبدا نعطيك ربع ساعه. اذا كنت جنرس معي حزود لك 5.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Thank you, Professor Fawad, for this introduction. Thank you all for being with us. I'm really happy and honored to be among this gathering of distinguished professors and scholars in the field of language, literature, and translation. My topic today could be a little bit alien to somebody. It's about the translatability of Jordanian folkloric songs from Arabic into English. It is, unlike the globalization, it's the opposite, it's localization. I'm going to talk about local songs and how a translator would encounter problems in doing that. Poetry in general and lyric poetry in particular are perhaps the most difficult types of text to be rendered from one language into another without much change in meaning and structure. That's why folkloric songs could be considered as toilsome to be rendered because they are often culture bound. Moreover, they have a highly complicated sound structure which plays an important role in transmitting culture. It may be helpful and useful to investigate a number of difficulties in translating these rhyme texts, which reflect certain aspects of culture, social, political, and ecological, among others. Despite the dearth, scarcity of references, the authors, here I have one colleague as well, Dr. Walbahs, who was one of my students, and we wrote this article, in fact, together. The authors here have succeeded in obtaining the necessary data for translating these folklore songs. They aim to reach modest findings which could be beneficial to students with translation. In this paper, it may be useful to introduce some ideas about the nature of translation and translatability, as well as literal translation with special reference to the semantic versus communicative translation. It also aims to shed light on the translatability of some Jordanian folkloric songs. This study partly provides examples of the author's translations from Arabic into English. We translated these, which are only attempts of translating these literary texts. The translations are meant only for the aim of comparison or to support data. Some conclusions and recommendations about the translatability of folkloric songs are reached. Introduction, I don't like to read much about the theory of translation. I'm sure you are aware of the equivalence in translation and those written by scholars and theorists like Eugene Naida, Newmark, Professor de Gouran, among others. Basil Hatim in the Arabic world, he wrote a lot, in fact, about this. All translations included in the present paper may be categorized in 2 categories. First, verse has been translated into verse, where aesthetic elements of the original text are fairly preserved, but sometimes loss of meaning occurs. This is very usual when it comes to culture-bound texts like these. Second, verse is translated into prose where there is faithfulness to the meaning of the original text, but distortion to its music and form are inevitable. However, folkloric songs are basically meant for singing and sometimes for singing and dancing. Thus, when translating them, it's essential to transfer their music or at least provide the translation with rhyme and or rhythm. Had this aim been excluded, the translation then would probably have had another purpose. For example, studying the speech community which original texts represent, i.e. their traditions, history, language, religion, among others. Consequently, it could be assumed that translating folkloric songs, retaining the music of the original or providing them with new rhyme and or rhythm would be valid for these purposes, to be sung in the target language or to be used as a field of study or for both purposes. Since no two languages are identical, either in form or meanings of words and structures, there will be no absolute correspondence between languages. Consequently, exact translation is an unattainable task. It's an impossible task. And the produced translation will be merely an approximation of meaning. Differences in translations are perhaps accounted for the message, the author's ideolect, and the audience. As for the message, it's conveyed into the target language by means of form and content, and these cannot be completely separated. However, the translator can consider one of them and give it a priority according to the message or according to the audience. In translating the folkloric songs, the translator sometimes focuses on the form when the translation is meant for singing. However, when the content is the aim, he focuses on the meaning of the original, thus the form is given less priority and the text can be changed from rhymed verse into free verse or prose. The question that might spring into one's mind is, what are the best methods of translating folkloric songs? If this question is to be answered appropriately, we have to bear in mind the aim of translating these songs. If they are translated to study cultural phenomena in the source language, for example, then it suffices to render them into prose in the target language. But if they are translated to be used as songs in the target language, then it's perhaps inevitable to transfer their music or provide a translation with new music. And here the translator entertains audience. Translating poetry has been discussed by many scholars and theorists. Their studies have been devoted to studying problems of translating poetry by evaluating different translations of a single work or to personal attempts about how the translators solved problems they have faced. Opinions on translating poetry have been different. Some critics say that poetry must be translated into prose. Many authors like Naida, the Bugrand, among others, have different views regarding the translation of poetry. Generally speaking, studies on folkloric songs do not go beyond collecting a number of them and discussing their themes, as Al-Amal, Jordan writer said. In fact, very few translators have tried to translate folkloric songs. This might be due to the difficulty involved in the process of translating such songs and or the dearth of such works. That's why the authors of this paper opt to give their own translations, hoping that these translations would be modest examples to support their argument about translating these songs. The nature of the translation I'd like to say much about, because it is theoretical. We have semantic translation versus communicative translation, and I'm sure you are aware of that. and the best translation and the role of the translator here. If a translator reads a source language poem, he may have a different conception about the poem other than the conception of the poet. In other words, he may see it through his own perception. Thus, when he translates it, he may be influenced by his preconceptions and presuppositions. For this reason, it is difficult for the translator to attain the same aim of the poet, which is why the door may open wide for critics to express their views. Critics, too, may portray the original text in different ways and hence give difficult judgments. The theory of poetic translation provides us with a helpful account of how mental images are formed and how the target language text typically differs from the source language text.
5 minutes for ما هو خلينا نتفق. الحضور 4 واحنا عن الغداء على الوحده، فيا يروح عليكم الغداء يا تاخذوا محاضره، اختاروا. انا ننضبط تماما بالمحاضره. يلا. نعم. واحد من المحاسين يوزع الهاند اوت.
There are only 20 handouts, but I'll use the data shown here to illustrate my example. The first example here, thou wert the morning star among the living, earth thy fair light had fled. Now, having died, thou art as Hesperus giving new splendor to thee. This stanza is translated into Arabic by the authors. We translated كنت نجمة الصباح في سماء الناظرين ثم صرت لرواحي واختفى النور المبين وهناك في فضاء صرت كوكب السماء زاد نورا كل حين. The second Arabic version, we give it another translation. كنت أنت قبل الأفول نجمة الصبح في الأحياء ثم خبوت وارتحلت وفي عالم الموتى صرت مبعث الضياء مبعث البهاء صرت نجمة المساء. This is literal translation. Another example of the Jordanian colloquial expressions. كنت لأن اوكي. Example 2. يا رب تشنتي يا رب خلي العجايز تنضب. Full of words. Oh Lord, oblige the old women to go to get inside homes. Now, this is literal. If we put it, we translate it into English. May it rain cats and dogs, and make the crones lie as dogs. Crones, you know. They will hide, they will roll in their houses as hedgehogs. A third example, it is used to be folkloric in Jordanian festivals of marriage and wedding parties. In Arabic, أمس الحشم لاقاني شايل الجهاز مثل البلوري زازي بين البزاز مثل البلوري لالي يا حلالي لحرق حالي مع حاله وبزيت الكاز. Now, the translation we get. Yesterday I met her, the shy and polite, carrying the kazoo and walking with delight. How twinkling it is between her breasts, the clear crystal in that place rests. Out to my senses, was I at the scene? Once she is not mine, surely I will burn together our two selves with kerosene. Another Translation: yesterday amid the shy and polite cutting the tausu, like the clear crystal twinkling between the vests, like the clear crystal twinkling, oh my legal property, I will burn her and myself with kerosene oil. This is literal translation. Another song, أسمر خفيف الروح بلحظة رماني. This is known in Jordan everywhere. حكيته باسمه يا يما هو ما حكاني. قلت له تمهل يا زين يا رميني بسهم العين، ماخذ عقلي ورايح وين وانا استنى وين. دربي دربك مهما يقول يا الاسمراني. The literal translation, I gave on it, with his glance show me, I talked to him by his name, oh mom. He didn't talk to me. I said to him, slow down, you beautiful one. Who shoots me with the arrow of his eye, taking my mind, where am I to wait? My road is yours, whatever long it is, open it. This is literal translation. Literal is not always functional.
the conclusion.
Yeah. How many minutes? Conclusion. Yeah. Another example.
والله آخر واحد. ما خلتني ما في غدا، إذا تخلصوا ما جيت على واحد غدا ما في.
The conclusion we move to. It's a very interesting conclusion. In fact, though, having discussed fully the examples, appreciate the conclusions. Recommendations, in fact, for translators for persons, as we said, translating for a person presents various obstacles. Perhaps it would be helpful to offer the following suggestions to help translators of these songs. It's easier to translate lyrical poems than to translate folklore songs because the last are culture bound. 2. In conveying the tune of the original folklore song, a translator has to be aware of the number of syllables in the original text, paying attention to accent. If these are conveyed faithfully, the target language text will have the opportunity to sound similar in tune. This may be seen clearly in the following kinds, I don't like to say takes time. 3. Simple language is required in translating folklore songs because they are intended for laymen. The slang sometimes can do the job. 4. Adjusting the original is sometimes obligatory because it may be impossible to render terms into other lexical items in the target language with the same number of syllables. Hence, the translator has to change either the tune or the meaning, which consequently leads him to add or delete. For example, consider the line of the Arabic folklore song, Ya Rabbi, Yalla al-Ghayth, Ya Rabbi, this is Rayn al-Rabbi. The English translation may be, oh my God, make it rain to water our sugar cane. The English version has the same tune and the same number of syllables in the first hemistich, but the second hemistich has more syllables due to the design of the rhyme, which is essential in folklore songs. 5. Folklore songs are often culture bound. The translator then has two options in rendering them. He may either convey the original cultural aspect and let the reader imagine and think, or he may convey a similar cultural aspect in the target language. These songs generally have a number of non-sensical lexical items. These can be either omitted or substituted by other nonsensical words in the target language. These will provide great help to the translator in designing the meter and the rhyme. 7. Sometimes the whole song is nonsensical due to its own lexical items or because words do not correlate. Here the translator may fail to produce the type of a translation. 8. It's essential to choose songs that do not harm religious, political, or social feelings of the target languages when translating these songs to be published in a book. 9. It's recommended that more studies be dedicated to the process of translating these songs from Arabic into English and vice versa. The modest attempts which have been made here at translating a number of songs while also producing a sort of poetic music may encourage other researchers to complete this work. It's also recommended that students of translation devote more interest to translating these songs from English to other languages into Arabic and vice versa. They can ask help of musicians who can write the musical notations of these signs, thus enabling them to produce equivalent folklore songs. A collection of translated songs will help Arab readers to get more information about people of other countries and their music. Thank you very much for
شكرا جزيلا للدكتور على هذه المحاضرة وهذا الموضوع الطيب، لكن أريد أن تذكيره أن بعد معاهدة السلام مع إسرائيل منعت أغنية توفيق النبري مرحلة من رعاتنا رجل ولا بلادنا. This is no longer يعني sang by people. وهذا ما أشار إليه في مخاتمته أن الأغاني السياسية والتي لها إيماءات سياسية مرات قد يكون يعني لها حرمة سياسية. سنؤخر الحوار إلى آخر هذه الجلسة. أما متحدثنا الثاني أوكي فاين. متحدثنا في اللقاء الثاني الدكتور أحمد العالي. He got a PhD in English Literature from Glasgow University, UK. He's Associate Professor at Applied Science University. Published works in the 20th century fiction and modern literature, and also literary theory. The floor is yours, Dr. Ahmed. Thank you.
Since we've been to the world of singing, I'd like first to apologize for the quality of my voice. I sound like George Wassouf, but only temporarily, inshallah. The Crime of Lot 45, a novel by Thomas Pynchon, first published in 1966. It is the shortest of his novels. Thomas Pynchon won the National Book Award in America, and he is a constant contender for the Nobel Prize for Literature. The novel briefly speaks about a woman, her name is Odiwa Mas, possibly unearthing the centuries-old conflict between two mail distribution companies. The novel is often classified as an example, or a notable example, of postmodern fiction. The lady, Odiwa Mas, a practical but restless woman, married to a disc jockey, finds out that she has been made to the executor of the state of Klea Inverarity, a rich industrialist and the subject of a past flame. Confused but curious, she travels to San Narciso. This is a mythological or mythologized city in California, in order to carry out her duties. But almost at once, she discovers that things are not what they seem. Soon, she begins to suspect that she has stumbled upon a conspiracy, a vast, perhaps global conspiracy that involves Inverarity, her lawyers, the employees of Yo-Yo Doom, and maybe even her husband. On the basic level, the novel can be read as an intellectual thriller or a postmodern mystery. The narrative is consistent, the plot moves along rapidly, and the point of view remains stable. But a reading confined to this surface level does little justice to either the book or the reader, and may lead to much frustration rather than enjoyment. The text is almost completely open, and readers who are looking for a single interpretation are setting themselves up for failure. Even after several readings, one finds that the novel deliberately evades solutions. Even this is one of the hallmarks of Pynchon's unique style. Like a classical physicist who attempts to explain quantum-level observations with Newtonian mechanics, a reader who demands certainty will find the structure of the work itself acting to confound and dismiss them. Almost every question raised by the novel seems to generate two contradictory solutions, and almost every perception experienced by its characters is clouded by a built-in uncertainty principle. The book must be approached from an open, more modern perspective. Like a quantum physicist's view of light, we must hold two mutually exclusive ideas at once until an observation conjures a, quote, reality into being. And like Codify herself, we may never make that ultimate observation. Therefore, the novel poses the question, what is reality? Something that we project in our head, or is it something that stands immutable? As Codify grapples with these questions at the risk of her sanity, the evasive structures of the novel forces the reader to confront them as well. Then, I argue that the plot contains the framework for first or inner metaphor, which in turn gives rise to second and encompassing other. Pynchon's strategy proceeds as follows. He depicts social environment of the 1950s and early 60s, the status quo of American life, while at the same time indicating fractures and inconsistencies in that model. Then, though the possibility of the mysterious terrestrial experience very much focused in the work, Pynchon provides a catalyst for Oedipus' introduction to reality outside the status quo. And then there is Pynchon's uses of the protagonist's search for terrestrial to portray the society's hidden underbelly, that is the weakest or the damaged part of the structure of society, the lives of those exalted or excluded from participation in the mainstream of American life. This portrayal functions as a critique of the dominant mindset of the period by revealing the ignorance and the ambivalence of mainstream American society concerning the nation's actual state of affairs. Now, to talk about the juxtaposition of fiction and reality, Pynchon reveals a disjunction between the reader and the text. The disjunction is caused by the fact that, as with information internalized in real life, quotation again, information given within a text must be interpreted before it can be said to have meaning. As Oedipus discovers through the upheaval of her most basic assumptions about reality, with this need for interpretation comes the possibility of multiple interpretations, resulting in an undefined, very often unstable relationship between the reader and the text. The text then does not ultimately communicate a singular, coherent, verifiable meaning to the reader, with its shifting, hazy boundaries between fiction and reality. Okay? The novel, the narrative of the novel, I haven't started. This is it's not teasing, this is harassment. And you spoke of globalization as a form of imperialism, and you are exercising it. Okay. Now, right. I have singled out certain aspects of reading the text I am reading social criticism as a catalyst. I say that Pynchon's first maneuver is to situate the novel in the status quo of the 50s and the early 60s culture. So the work opens to a thoroughly typical day in the life of a suburban housewife. And then when her husband completes the representation of a normal household of the period, he is presented as the sole breadwinner. Oedipia does not have a career, and her conjuring about the letter from the lawyer, her one-time lover, is subordinated to a play-by-play of preparing the home against the arrival of her husband. She recognizes the routine nature of her daily life in the midst of this conjuring as she, I quote the book, wandered, shuffling back through a fat deck full of days which seemed more or less identical. A second example of breaks in the system is the marital infidelities committed by Oedipa and her husband. I'm not going to go into detail in that for the sake of time. I have lots of examples actually. I want to get into the second point in dealing with the work is I have argued that Pynchon uses the technique of metaphor within metaphor. Okay? And I see that one of the greatest ironies in the work is the fact that the protagonist does not recognize the plight Pynchon uses her to depict. She fails to comprehend the situation that truly is right in front of her. Conclusion. I can't jump into conclusion now, I'm too heavy. All right. I also include in the study binary reading approaches and epistemological analysis of the crisis that the work presents. I will shift to the conclusion. Right. I argue that the approaches towards engaging the reality for the reader, engaging the text, are at extremes. Yet, in the protagonist, as a representative of the reader, these modes are co-joined. Ultimately, however, the extremes are irreconcilable. Though she embodies and utilizes both the circumstant variation of the Puritan and the gross detachment of a tourist voyeur, Oedipa, the protagonist, is closer to attaining pulse sulphurous meaning. At the end of the narrative, then, she was at the beginning. Instead, the merging of these approaches results in epistemological collapse, a spiraling vortex of ambiguity and confusion. And I think with the confusion, if you can make what the real message of the paper is, then I think I have hit the point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Since we are running out of time, we'll give one speaker this session, and the two speakers will be given the chance to share after الغداء. Thank you very much. The third speaker is Professor Dr. Zaid Malik, and I'm happy to meet him for the second time. Previously at Urban National University, and this time at Zaytun University. He's Associate Professor of Hadith in International Islamic University, Islamabad. He got a law degree from International Islamic, a Master's in Islamic Studies, Master in Arabic Language Studies, PhD in Arabic, and he has a very rich experience. Now the floor is yours, Professor Zaid.
The topic of my presentation is cultural exposure, a real challenge to a translator. start with the introduction by saying that Arabs are unique in their culture and language from the rest of the world. They may share their religion with the non-Arab nations, but still they don't share their culture and language with any nation on the face of the earth. Hence, it becomes necessary for any non-Arab translator in general and Pakistani translators in particular to have in-depth study of Arabic language and culture before they undertake the task of translation. During my long stay and mixing up with the Arab world, I came to know about some of the main cultural differences between the Arabs and Pakistanis that may be summarized as under. A. Arabs are very focal in talking about marriage. Pakistanis not. Arabs may openly say, this man is going to be my son-in-law. Pakistanis would hesitate to do that. Arabs may openly discuss 4 marriages. Arabs are more straightforward. Arabs are wealthier, and Arabs are more generous than Pakistanis. And all these realities have their impact on the Arab culture. Similarly, there are some differences between Arabic and Urdu language also. For example, Urdu needs long sentences. Arabic has the quality of brevity, al-ijaz. It may tell many things in few words, jawami al-kalim, as we know. Hence, communicative translation is needed. This need is badly felt when translating the Holy Quran. That's why it is noticed that the scholars who avoided communicative translation resorted to frequent use of parentheses in the text of Urdu translation. Secondly, Arabic language is more serious in its nature, while Urdu may contain the element of non-seriousness in it, in a sense that one word or one sentence may mean more than one meanings, causing confusion. Thirdly, Arabic language has some dialects that are spread among the tribes, and I'm talking about the pure Arabic. Hence, the Holy Quran was revealed in 7 dialects. نزل القرآن على 7 أحرف. And here there is an interesting story that I may quote. During the time of the first caliph, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, and during his time there were some battles that is called apostasy battles, Hurub al-Ridda. So he sent Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu to tackle the problem of Malik bin Nuwayra. And when he caught him and his followers, they were captives, Khalid ibn al-Walid told his soldiers, in Arabic he said, أَدْفِئُوا أَسْرَاكُمْ. And then he heard that his men that were belonging to some particular tribe, they started killing the captives. So he hurriedly came out of his tent and he said, what is going on? And he stopped the killing. And he said, why you are doing so? And he said, we are just executing your orders. You commanded us to do that. He said, I meant that the night is cold and you should take care of the captives, give them some warm clothes or blankets. He said, adfi'u in our dialect means uqtulu, to kill. And that's what we're doing. So, my conclusion from this example is that if this is the case of the native dwellers of Arabian Peninsula and the speakers of the pure Arabic language, then how big would be the challenge when there are 2 entirely different languages and cultures trying to translate from and to each other's language? Looking into the history of translation a little bit, we see that the 20th century has been called the age of translation or the age of reproduction. Tytler wrote the first significant book on translation in 1790, and then there are so many scholars who define the word translation. One of the definitions is that translation is a craft consisting in the attempt to replace written message or statement in one language by the same message. He leaves behind a gap of understanding. English is totally different from Arabic. The Arabic pragmatics, at-tadawuliyya, is usually not properly understood by the foreigners. Hence, they don't understand the idioms and expressions of Arabic. Translation is actually the outcome of all these prerequisites. Secondly, philology is the basic prerequisite for etymology. Phonetics basically tells us the practical usage of language, which specifies particular meanings. One of the basic phonetic characteristics of Arabic language is its being the language of the letter Dad, لغة الضاد. Pronouncing the Arabic alphabets wrongly causes a gap of understanding between a native speaker of Arabic and a foreigner. If a foreigner pronounces any word with any of these letters, Sad, Dad, Ta, Dha, Ain, Ha, Dhal, and Tha, wrongly, he is laughed at. As the Arabic language belongs to the family of phonetic languages, it is almost difficult for the foreigners to pronounce the Arabic alphabets without the due practice. Here I may make a bold statement that it could be said that the clash between the East and the West is more a matter of the language barrier than that of the civilizations. There are some native speakers of English who seriously felt this barrier and tried to remove it. The name of Edward Lane could be mentioned on top of the list, who wrote Arabic English lexicon after consulting the dictionaries written by the great scholars of Arabic language like Taj al-Urus by Zubaydi, Mu'jam Maqayis al-Lugha by Ibn Faris, and Lisan al-Arab by Ibn Manzur, and Al-Qamus al-Muhit by Firuzabadi, and Fiqh al-Lugha by Tha'ali.
5 minutes for the
Another great personality is A.J. Arbery, who translated the Holy Quran and named his translation The Quran Interpreted. The uniqueness of this translation is that after writing a preface for the translation in the beginning, and then after completing over half of the translation, exactly after completing the translation of Surah Taha, he wrote a second preface in which he says, I think it is justifiable to adopt the unusual procedure of adding a separate preface to the second installment of a 2-volume work. I suppose I shall never again recapture the freshness and excitement of the experience just now completed. The passing months and years will inevitably blur the image. This is the moment or never to attempt to record the impact which a sustained and concentrated exploration of the Quran has left on my mind and my heart. Moreover, it is also seen that the bias which the West cherishes about the Arabic language prevents them from objective and in-depth understanding thereof. They just presume that the Arabic language does not have the capability to deal with the issues related to the psychology of human beings. I think it was the same bias that led an American man of religion to burn the Holy Quran. Had he possessed in-depth knowledge of the Arabic language, he would have never done so. Then during the last century, there were many men of letters who also tried to bridge this gap which I mentioned between the East and the West by translating the Holy Quran and other works in an authentic manner. For example, to cite a few, George Sale, Dr. Rodwell, Palmer, Pickthall, Hafiz Sarwar, and Abdullah Yusuf Ali all translated the Holy Quran and tried to bridge this gap. The science of semantics has already been dealt with by Muslim scholars. For example, the book Mukhtasar al-Ma'ani by Sa'duddin Taftazani, he wrote many usages of one word. For example, the usage of the word of He says that it means the one who went astray, as in وَالضَّالِّينَ. It means the one who is lost, as in فُلَانٌ ضَلَّ الطَّرِيقِ. It means the one about whom people are in oblivion, as in وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى. It also means the one who disappears, as it is said, لَقَدْ ضَلَّ وَجْهُكِ فِي ضَفَائِرِكِ كَمَا يَضِلُّ الْبَدْرُ فِي الْغُيُومِ. Arabic is called the language of Dad, لغة الضاد, as I said. That is a language with the letter of Dad, too difficult to pronounce by the non-Arabic speaking people. It is also called the language of al-Adad, لغة الأضداد. That is the language of similar words with contradictory meanings. For example, the word qist means justice. From this root, the word al-muqsit is derived, which means the just. From the same root, the word al-qasir is derived, which means the unjust. Jahil, a great scholar of Arabic, wrote on this subject his famous literary and linguistic book entitled Al-Mahasin wal-Abdad. Then there is another linguistic aspect that is worth considering as it determines the meaning of a word, and that is preposition. For example, if I say, I have discussed the issue, its Arabic would be Bahastul Qadiyya. And if I want to say, I have probed the issue, its Arabic would be Bahastu fil Qadiyya. And if I want to say, I have searched the issue, its Arabic would be Bahastu anil Qadiyya. So with these different propositions, the meanings also change. There are many phrases and idioms in Arabic language that are usually not understood properly by the non-Arabs. A linguistic environment is needed in this case. One should live the Arabic language for mastering its deep aspects. I'm jumping. Yeah. Regarding the methods of translation, communicative and semantic, as most of you should know, although some scholars are of the opinion that semantic translation is always inferior to its original, since it involves loss of meaning, hence a communicative translation is better as it gains clarity of what it lost in semantic content. In communicative translation, the translator tries in his own language to write a little better than the original. In communicative translation, one has the right to correct or improve the logic, to replace clumsy with elegant, or at least functional. All such corrections and improvements are usually inadmissible in semantic translation. But this view is an exaggerated one, since the science of semantics deals analytically with the meanings of the words, phrases, idioms, and syntax of the original language. And as such, it is, and should be, the basis of communicative translation, which is impossible without semantic proof of the original language. Since a communicative translation is theoretically a subjective process, in the sense that it is psychologically oriented and is more concerned initially with achieving a definite effect on its reader's mind by taking liberty with it to adjust itself to their expectations and their mental and emotional makeup. Hence, a lot of objectivity and impartiality is lost in the process. Moreover, communicative translation may be a useful tool in oratory, especially in political or religious stage, whereas it fails to do justice to language expressions of purely scientific and empirical nature.
Conclusion. Sure. Yeah.
It is then semantic translation which comes to the forefront to do its job objectively and seriously without tempering or interfering with the original text, merely to mold and adjust its meaning to make a psychological impact on the reader. Conclusion.
Yeah. Food is waiting.
Question, discussion or في discussion؟
discussion في الغداء إن شاء الله. تحدثوا ولا بيتموا دكتور الشيخ.
يا دكتور فواز 5 دقائق.
طيب
I would conclude in a few words by saying that the translation is a creative process, particularly when it involves different cultures. The good translator, like an artist, should capture and convey the spirit of the text and should not care for its physical features or the outward form. Thank you very much.
شكرا جزيلا. شكرا. خيار نتحدث عن أسلحتنا في الغداء أو ناخذ 5 دقائق. 5 دقائق. طيب دكتور تفضل. دكتور الشيخ تفضل.
Okay, thank you very much for this. My question will be addressed, or my comments will be addressed to Dr. Muhammad Nadeem. Thank you very much for this interesting and witty talk. But I beg to disagree about 4, 5, 6 points. I will just comment on one thing. I lost you while talking about sound and letters. We don't pronounce letters. So لغة الضاد, although that's an old statement, like it's not really true that Arabic is the only language that has got the sound or the phoneme ضاد. And when we pronounce, we don't pronounce any longer letters, but we pronounce phonemes, or at least alphabets. Second point is that I was appeased by the description of Arabic language and the Arabs, but I thought you were rather complimented at being an objective description, especially in the light of modern linguistics, where you can't really say that one language is much richer than another. Third, Sayyid in particular, in his translation of the Quran, did not mean to give an objective translation. Even his introduction proves that he was biased. He only wanted to translate the book according to what he said in order to show the English reader how silly that book is. So you can't put him together with somebody like Marmaduke Bechdel or even Arbery. Finally, the final point is that when talking about semantic and communicative translation, semantic translation does not aim at changing the original. It doesn't mean to lose some lexical meaning. And in fact, even when you translate a scientific text, if you take communicative translation to be the communication of the total textual effect, it will also be valid in the case of scientific. Thank you very much again for your talk.
Yes, sir. Quickly.
Well, I have only some remarks to make about your presentation. Thank you very much, first of all. Now, I think you have done non-Arabs a lot of injustice by saying that the bar can only be pronounced by Arab native speakers. During my study in Edinburgh, a friend of mine was doing his PhD on the bar sound, and he discovered that the best who pronounced, the one who best pronounced bar was an African from a non-Arab country. Those devout Muslims take so much care about how to pronounce, and they are very meticulous about this. This is first. Second, I think, it's an oversimplification of describing translation as a science on the grounds that it has to do with the grammar and something else. I think translation as a science is still a very controversial issue, a very thorny issue, and we need a lot of evidence, a lot of argument in order to prove whether or not it's a science. For me, translation is not yet a science. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My comments are addressed to Dr. Mohammed. There are two comments. First of all, he made a sort of comparison between Arab and Urdu cultures, and he said that Arabs can talk openly about marriage. On which basis did you build your talk? I would like to tell you that Arabs are very much conservative. They do not talk about marriage openly. The second one, you praise very much Arbery for his translation of the Holy Quran. I would like to tell you that I have carried out a study of euphemisms in Surah An-Nisa and how it is to be translated by three translators: Pickthall, Hilali and Khan, and the other one is Arbery. The result was, of these three, Arbery was the worst. He was the worst. He did much harm to the Holy Quran. Sorry to say this. If you want to discuss this with you later on, I can give you more discussion about that. Thank you.
First of all, I insist that Arabic is Lughatul Thought, and no one in the whole world has this language that contains this beautiful letter, which is to some extent problematic also, because it gave problem to Umar radiallahu anhu, Umar ibn al-Khattab, to pronounce it. And I never claimed that no non-Arab can pronounce this word. I said with due practice. If you practice it, I'm not an Arab, and I memorized the whole Quran since childhood, and I can pronounce the letter of Ba with a Ba-lim. And then, regarding your question, my brother, the idea is to praise the Arabs in this sense that they are straightforward, and if this topic of marriages were so openly discussed in the non-Arab countries, which are the Muslim countries, we would have seen polygamy there as well, but we don't see it as much as we see it in the Arab nations. So there was an example I had to make, but due to the warning of my brother, I just summed up. I worked in the eastern region of Saudi Arabia for a couple of years, and there was Ramadan, and I was invited by my Egyptian boss, and there were 2 other Egyptian guys, they were also invited. And when we sat in his drawing room, his 10-year-old girl came and she shook hands with all of us. And one of the Egyptian guests, he started talking to her, and كيف حالك, إيش اسمك, يا عروسة, إيش رأيك أتجوزك? In front of her father. إيش رأيك أتجوزك? She said, خلاص أنا أتجوزك.
This is the train.
I was scared that there could be a fight break out between him and her father, but when I look at her father, he was also smiling as if it is normal. So I said, no, this is a big difference. I mean, I cannot say that, neither I can translate this conversation, because I would have to save my skin after translations. So that was difficult.
شكرا جزيلا لكم على حسن الاستماع. نكمل في الغداء ان شاء الله في مطعم الجامعه. الغداء في مطعم الجامعه.
Applied Sciences University, Amman. She got her BA and MA in Literature and Criticism from Yarmouk University. Her PhD is from the University of Georgia. She published 6 papers and translated 7 books for Kalima publishers in Abu Dhabi. Her major interest is world literature and post-colonial theories. I'm really proud of her because she was a student in our university. So welcome, Dr. Sura, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Rajai. I hope this will stand. Maybe I can use the other one. Okay, thank you. Well, presenting a paper after this delicious lunch is a very difficult task to do. However, if I start hallucinating, please forgive me, because usually I take a long nap after lunch. However, Dr. Fawaz is to be blamed for that. He's not here today, or at the moment. Okay, the title of my paper is Colonialism and the Exotic in Kublai Khan, or Kublai Khan, Imperialism Writes Back. A perceptive reading of Romantic literature tells us a lot about the fascination of Romantic poets of the idea of the exotic. Obviously, Romantic writers found sources of images of the exotic in different references. In medieval and Gothic culture, in folk culture, in the world of ancient Greece, and the world of the medieval and Renaissance Italy as well. But they also looked for the exotic, or images of the exotic, in the Orient, which usually means either the Far East or the Islamic world. And they depended a lot on the reading of the translation of the Arabian Nights or the India of Hindu antiquity and Mughal domination. Now, we all know that in Kublai Khan, a poem by Coleridge, we have 2 geographical settings. Basically, we have Asian Tartary and we have African Abyssinia, which represent to the poet who was under the influence of opium when he wrote the poem, they represent the exotic. The Orient in Kublai Khan is a place of unbelievable magical beauty and power. However, it's also a place of tyranny, eroticism, and danger. And this is actually the main theme of the whole paper, to discuss how this image of the exotic is always distorted by this misrepresentation of the Orient. I would like first, and probably briefly as well, since I have only 15 minutes, to give a brief paraphrase of Coleridge's description of this exotic as he imagines it. It is the pleasure dome built by the Pasha or Qibla Khan. The pleasure dome built in Khando, according to the degree of Qibla Khan, in a place where Alf, and that is the sacred river, ran through the caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. Imagine, a sunless sea. Walls and towers were raised around a fertile ground, filled with beautiful gardens and forests. The river ran 5 miles through the woods and finally sinks into a lifeless ocean. The pleasure dome's shadow floated on the waves, where the mingled sounds of the fountain and the caves could be heard. And finally, this pleasure dome also includes caves of ice. Now, what is interesting about this description of the exotic, that we have a description of the character of Qibla Khan, which is embedded between the lines, which suggests that Qibla is a type or a stereotype of the Oriental tyrant in search of a godlike power over his dominion. Now, traditionally, Western literature tends to view Asian societies as static, corrupt, and ruled and overruled by tyrannical khans, pashas, and maharajas. Asian men, as well, including Qibla Khan, are represented as cruel, passionate, unreliable, lording over the women, the sensuous womenfolk, whom they jealously keep in the harems or in haramlak. Now, at the same time, and I had to review other romantic texts to make sure that this is a frequent pattern in romantic writings. Most of these writings show that this image of the Orient, which seems to be static, or women specifically, they usually need a European hero to liberate them, or to play the role of the savior, or to civilize them. For instance, in Bickford's famous novel, Khalid Vadik, or if you wish, Al-Khalifa Al-Wathiq, we know that Khalid Vadik is seeking divine power from a mysterious Indian wizard, and he is finally punished by an eternal damnation in the hell of Iblis, the same Qibla Khan is, because his power is likewise threatened by the eruption of the fountain in the deep romantic chasm, destroying his ordered dominion into huge fragments. In Shelley's Alastor, for instance, we have the young poet, the hero of the poem, who travels east. He travels to Kashmir, actually, looking for the thrilling secrets of the birth of time. The description of the poet shows that he's restless, and finally he reaches a valley in Kashmir, which like color, reaches Abyssinia, actually. The valley is suggested to be another location for an earthly paradise. There, he falls asleep. He dreams of a beautiful, voluptuous, veiled maiden, and he falls in love with that figure which he meets in his dream. In such a narrative poetry, both Coleridge and Shelley represent the relationship between the East and the West as gendered. In other words, as a European man feigning in love or even seduced by a fascinating Oriental woman and usually destroyed by her love. The same thing can be said about the female figure in the Corsair by Byron. In the Corsair, we have the European figure of Conrad, who represents a mixture of the reckless courage and chivalric sentimentality of the Western tough young man. He's represented as a knight who's loyal to his wife, his Greek wife, and also as the knight who saves Golner, the Turkish woman, the mistress of the Pasha Sayyid, who's kept in the harem. She's the harem queen, but she's kept there. He comes and he releases her. Many lines are dedicated to describe this relationship between both of them, as she is described as a seducer. Now, despite his love for his wife, Conrad has almost imperceptibly been seduced by Golner's heady charms. In other words, she becomes another Cleopatra casting her erotic spell over Mark Antony. She's also seen as a vicious figure. Notice the image of the Oriental woman. She kills her lover, she slaughters him while he was sleeping. Back to Cobbler-Camp. We're told that Coleridge wrote the poem while he was under the influence of opium. So the poem is actually written in a state of reverie. Now, opium seems to be a means of, or it helped him, it inspired him, especially after reading a book by Marco Polo describing Cobbler-Camp and his dome. The influence of opium is very clear, and Coleridge talks about it. And he describes the idea of the exotic, and he relates it to the comfort and the pleasures that opium provided him with. This concept of the relationship between the exotic and the influence of opium seems to be very clear in other works, such as the one by Thomas de Quincey, The Confessions of an English Opium Eater. In that work, the Oriental or the Far East is represented as a dreamy world of opium eaters, and the poem describes the pleasures rather than the pains of eating opium. Eating opium is usually associated in romantic works or literature with the Turks, the Chinese, and other Orientals. The title of the work itself, Confessions of the English Opium Eater, suggests that or associates opium eating with the idea of pleasure. So in this sense, de Quincey portrays himself, in other words, as an orientalized Englishman. Coleridge's dream of the million years asleep of Vishnu, in a famous quotation by him, he wishes to sleep for a long time, to be united with the Hindu deity figure Vishnu. His dream of this million years asleep of Vishnu and the forests of ancient as the hills in Cobbler-Camp revolve upon the ancientness of the Orient. As de Quincey puts it, the mere antiquity of Asiatic things, of their institutions, histories, modes of faith, etc., is so impressive that to me the vast age of the race overpowers the sense of youth in the individual. So Coleridge wished for this antiquity, which he found very rich in the Orient. Okay. How much you can say in 5 minutes? Fine. I've noticed in most of these works that I compared and contrasted in my paper that there is a very clear binary opposition, the characterization of the Orient, which is associated, or the exotic, associated with the world of the Orient and the Western world. For instance, when it comes to the Orient, you have always these elements such as the timelessness of the Orient, myth is associated with the Orient, mysticism as well, while when it comes to the West, or usually the hero of these poems, timelessness is replaced by history, mysticism and myth are replaced by rationalism and moral purposefulness. This dichotomy is not actually based on an actual experience. Coleridge has never been to the East, actually, but it is based on a stereotypical perception of this part of the world, which has been very clear in these works. Thank you.
Thank you, for complying with the time. I'm sorry for asking you to stop. Shall we give the floor to the next speaker, and maybe you can talk later. It's my pleasure now to
Discussion first?
after.
It would be very difficult, especially that the whole thing is different.
Okay, whatever. Okay, fine. For 5 minutes, cover.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for this very interesting, presentation. Although I was just going to ask about two things. First, do we have to take for granted Coleridge's own claim about opium, because I beg to disagree. And if I disagree, I would like you very much to cast some light on the resemblances, clear ones, between Kubla Khan on the one hand and ancient rhyme of the ancient mariner on the other hand. In both cases there is that kind of motionless sea, in which case it is not simply a description of a sunless ocean because it is in the east. Because all this could be also linked to Coleridge's idea of fancy and imagination and the primary and secondary imagination, which he has borrowed from Immanuel Kant. Thank you very much.
Let me just respond to that, if you don't mind. Well, I think probably we should not take everything for granted, but when it comes to a writer telling us about himself, which modern criticism refuses nowadays, and we talk about the death of the author. But when a writer actually tells us that he was under the influence of opium, and this helped him a lot, and he was reading a description by Marco Polo, I think you have to consider this in reading the poem. I agree that this is the production of a rich imagination. However, this does not negate the fact that probably actually he was under the influence of opium. However, this is not the issue.
Yes.
This does not affect the reading of the poem. That's the point.
There's similarity between it and the rhyme of the ancient mariner.
Okay, you mean this poem?
Yes.
Now, the way I look at it when he talks about capes of ice and a sunless sea, I think this sense of coldness he meant to associate with the Orient. In other words, I think this is part of the stereotypical image they have about the Orient. Because whenever we talk about power, whenever we talk about action, vitality, it's always associated with the West, but not with the East when it comes to romantic literature.
Thank you very much for the presentation, but I don't know whether this is a personal reinterpretation of this poem or what.
I'm sorry?
Is it a reinterpretation of this poem by you personally, or you have...
Are you asking about the paper?
Yeah, because, I mean, when we take the background of Kubla Khan, Coleridge was reading a book.
Yes,
It
by
was
Marco.
called Purchase's Pilgrimage. Then he slept, and when he was reading about Khan Kubla, who was a Mongol leader.
Yes.
And then when he woke up,
Yes.
he wanted to write the dream.
Yes.
As we know, according to his theory of poetry, that poetry is the willing suspension of disbelief for the moment which constitutes poetic faith. So the minute that he had this kind of imagination, he wrote, where do you find colonialism in this poem? It is only a mere imagination
Where
of...
do I find what? I'm sorry. Ah, okay. Okay.
You see, I mean, could you explain to us what do you mean by this? It's
No,
only
yeah.
because you know that the Coleridge was not he was not interested in politics at
No,
all.
well,
He was a
actually,
drug
yeah.
addict,
Yeah.
and being a romantic, all romantics used to write for themselves, purely subjective, and he was finding a certain kind of interest in writing.
Fine,
This is
okay.
good.
Well,
He
actually,
had no idea about colonialism or any political thought or something like that.
no, this is not the point actually. The point of the paper that the description of the exotic in Kubla Khan and many other texts which belong in the romantic literature tell us more about the East, about the West, those writers and the thought, more than it does about the Orient. Now, the description of the exotic is meant to tell us something about Coleridge's picture of the exotic and the Orient. The way I read it, that it tells us a lot about him as a Westerner viewing the Orient from such a prejudiced image. So what I talk about is the stereotypical image.
He was simply describing a dream.
Fine, but he was actually affected by his own thought. That's the point.
A dream and a vision. Another name of that one.
Well, this is at least what he claims. But sometimes the political thought of the writer might become very clear in his writings, despite the fact that he would never admit it.
Exactly.
And I think...
Thank you, Mr. Salam. The second speaker is Professor Siti Hamin Startup, and she's from Malaysia. And by the way, we are going to honor the former Malaysian Prime Minister tomorrow at the University of Georgia to give him an honorary doctorate degree, because he deserves really an applause just because, and Dr. Siti comes from the school of Siti. تعال انت وشامة تعال I was waiting for you. تعال. Okay. From the School of Language Studies and Linguistics, the National University of Malaysia. She obtained her MA degree from University of Durham, UK, and her PhD from the University of Glasgow. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. First, I would like to say, please ignore the title of my paper in the program, because when I sent the abstract a few months ago, I didn't know that I only have about 15 minutes for the presentation. So the research is quite huge, so I'm going to report on part of the research that I have done here. So the title of my presentation is a study on linguistic structures of research article abstracts by Malaysian writers. So this is the introduction. So this is definition of research article. I mean, we are all very familiar with, we are here all presenting our papers based on research. And sometimes most of the times as academicians, we publish our work in journals and so on, yeah. So research articles play a significant role in disseminating new knowledge within academic communities, both national and international. So according to Swales, 1990, research article is a written text, right? Usually limited to a few thousand words that reports on some investigation carried out by its author or authors. So my study is on the abstract of the research article. So let's look at the definition of abstract. So we have been, as academicians, we've been writing abstracts many, many times. In fact, when we sent our abstract to this conference, so most of us are very familiar with this. So it has been seen as a concise summary of the accompanying paper, and its main function is as informing about the exact content of the article. And according to Van Dyke, the abstracts function as independent discourses, as well as being advanced indicators of the content and structure of the following text. So according to Vijay Bhatia, the content of abstract should have all following. First, what the author did, and how the author did it. So the purpose actually, and then the methodology, what the author found or findings, and what the author concluded, the conclusion. And Wisberg and Uta call this content of abstract as number one, background, and then purpose, method, results, and conclusion. So there are a few other people who have come up with different names for the content of the abstract, but basically the content are just like this. So this is very important in genre analysis when we study about the moves in research article abstract. Okay, so actually my study is bigger than what I'm going to present today, because I look at the contrastive rhetoric between Malaysian writers and international writers. And first we look at also at the moves that they use in the abstract, and also the linguistic features. But for the purpose of this conference, because I only have about 15 minutes, otherwise I'm going to get all the hints on the powers. So and having the powers as a chairperson, I have to be very quick. So the objective of the study is to identify the linguistic features. There are three that I'm going to look at: tenses, hedges, and transition words of the abstracts that were written by Malaysian writers. Okay, so these are just the three that I'm going to present today. Well, there are other linguistic features, but I'm going to focus on these three. So this is the limitation of the study. So why we did this research? We believe that it has some contribution. So it's considered important as it contributes to the current body of research on abstracts written by Indonesian writers, and indirectly towards the current body of research on the abstract writing as a whole. Well, it looks like writing abstract is very simple. It's very short. Yeah, sometimes about 200, 250 words. But to be because it will summarize the content of the paper. Sometimes, we have problems in writing a concise and with everything included in the abstract. So this research is significant to the pedagogical aspects. So it's not just on linguistic aspects, but also on the teaching of writing. So on the genre-based approach in teaching academic writing. So I'm sure that you are also familiar with teaching of academic writing, or doing academic writing course yourself. So it provides students with knowledge of the linguistic features of genre that they need to have command of when writing their research article abstracts for the students. Well, actually, there are a lot of criticisms about the genre approach of teaching writing, because sometimes some teachers, some researchers are very strict, in following all these moves and the linguistic features and so on. I believe that in genre approach, teachers doesn't have to be too rigid with matured writers, but for novice writers maybe because they need to know how to write academic writing and so on. So it's important that they follow all the steps. And after that, they can be a bit more creative. So in genre-based approach, it's not just on writing abstracts. If you are familiar with genre-based studies by Swales and Bhatia, they have done research on article introduction, and also Tony W. Evans did the whole thesis, the structure of the whole thesis. And Vijay Bhatia is more into the business writing, so he did some research on letter of application and so on. If you are interested in genre-based approach, then you should read both Swales and Bhatia. Okay. So this is what the framework that I will use when I analyze the tenses that we use in the abstract, which is taken from Lisbeth and Booker. So for example, like for background information, the first part, they have suggested that we use present tense, right? And then for the purpose of physical activity, we use past tense and or present perfect tense. And for methodology section, we suggested past tense, and for results is also past tense. And for conclusion, present tense and tentative verbs and modal auxiliaries. So these are just framework that that I use to analyze the abstracts. Yeah. And then I also analyze the abstracts based on the hedges used. So according to me and Xian, hedging is a type of interpersonal methodist course markers demonstrate the research article writer's modesty and politeness in academic written discourse by encoding their claims into tentative propositions rather than definite facts. Sometimes it's the claim that the writers make. They try not to make it very strong, so they try to soften it a little bit, so they would use hedges. So hedges, the person who has done a lot of research in hedging is, of course, Highland. Yeah? If you're interested in this, then you should read. He has written books and journal articles and so on. Okay, so to portray modesty and politeness in academic writing, so sometimes we use hedges. And transition words. This is for organization, for coherence purposes. So we should use transition words in writing academic papers and also in abstract. So transition words provide the reader the directions for how to piece together the ideas into a logically coherent argument. They are words with particular meanings that tell the reader to think and react in a particular way to the writer's ideas. So this is the methodology. So we have utilized both quantitative and qualitative methods. So for quantitative, we look at the frequency and percentage of types of linguistic features. And for qualitative, we explain the presence of the features. Okay, the samples for this study were 20 abstracts that were taken from 20 research articles written by Malaysian writers. And they are randomly selected from research articles published in a variety of English language journals between the years of 2000 to 2009. So a variety of journals were selected to observe the differences on how the different journals required the abstracts to be published. Yeah, because sometimes it's based on the requirement of certain journals on how they would accept abstracts to be published in their journals, in their publication. And the selections of abstracts were mainly from English language studies field, because the field of study was familiar to the researcher. So at the moment we're just looking at English language studies journal articles. It would be interesting to look at other articles as well, in other disciplines as well. So we look at the text, the findings. If you look at the background, or the background section, so there are 8 articles, 8 abstracts here that use a present tense, while 3 use a present perfect tense. And then for purpose, 5 have used past tense, and 15 present tense. So for method, 9 past tense, 9 present tense, and 1 each for present perfect tense and future tense. So for the result section, there are 5 that has used past tense, 12 used present tense, and 1 used present perfect tense. And for conclusion, 10 has used present tense and 3 past tense. So these are all the suggestions, the recommendation made by Whisper and Luca in writing the abstracts for this section. So, for example, the first one, 8 and 3 doesn't, when you add up, doesn't make 20. So the rest did not use what is suggested by the 2 practitioners. So let's look at the background and some examples of the background section. For example, one abstract, which is number 20. It's written this way: although general writing is a popular pedagogical class assignment required by teachers in EFL classes, there is still room for research into the use of general writing by teachers themselves to monitor the effectiveness of their teaching practice. And then I've chosen one who have used present perfect tense. Studies on computer use in education have taken into account the gender factor since the 1980s. However, results regarding gender differences have not been consistent, especially from the aspect of attitudes towards computer. So this is the background section. And for the purpose section, there's a past tense and present tense as well. The objective was to find out to what extent these institutes utilize the available information and so on. And then for present tense, the paper attempts to explore learner engagement in literacy-related issues and so on, right? So for the purpose section. So I'm not going to explain everything is in the paper because we have 15 minutes. So this is the hedging. Almost 15 minutes.
Well, I object. Suppose you are coming from overseas, you must be given like sessions.
It's okay. We have to be fair, all right? It doesn't matter. All right. So the frequency of the use of hedges in the abstracts by Malaysian writers. So 14 abstracts have used lexical verbs, 9 modal verbs, 5 adverbs of frequency, 2 modal adverbs, 1, 2 clause plus adjective, and then 2 clause plus adjective. This is from Highland. I've taken this from Highland. Yeah. So these are the examples. The lexical verbs. The most famous, famous one is the verb suggest. Yeah. The findings suggest. the results suggest, rather than the findings claim blah 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 and so on, but then suggest, which is the H is used, to soften the claim by the writers. And a model verb, this is motivated by studies that suggest again that the effective vocabulary learning process to offer explicit learning should be complemented with implicit learning. Should, not must, or things like that. And adverbs of frequency, right? So there's one. Results show that generally students have positive attitudes toward computers, but they have low skills in using computers. So the word generally, you have to show the adverb of frequency rather than giving exact percentage and so on. And model adverbs, large classes, lack of time, and multiple learning behaviors, blah blah, make learning and teaching of pronunciation an extremely tedious and costly task. And to clause and adjective, one of the conditions that have been claimed to be theoretically necessary for certain language acquisition is the production of modified output by learners. So now this is the transition words that were used by English writers. So addition, tweeting, all abstracts, have used the transition words that show addition, the results of position, examples, and then the time, chronological sequences, emphasis, and summary. So for example, the addition, like and in addition, also furthermore, right? In addition, it also as a means, blah, 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 and academic performance. So opposition type, right? The second frequently used when they use but, however, and although. Okay, all right. So you can it's in the paper actually. So the conclusion. All right. So the findings are relevant for the teaching of research writing to non-native speakers of English and help English for specific purposes. The term was ESP, right? Not English for stupid people. English for sexual purposes. All right. Okay, teachers and course designers to prepare discipline specific writing research courses. So rather than having a general academic writing, but more on discipline. And findings from genre analysis have also contributed to developments in curriculum for ASP. But then more study need to be conducted into the research article abstracts with more samples from various fields and various writers from different cultural background that you can compare. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll open the floor for questions and comments. Yes, ma'am. Can you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Dr. I am a full-staff member at Zaytuna University. My field is linguistics and particularly academic writing. So quickly, one question. So why do you think your study is significant and contributes to the field of education? And the second, is there one standard format for writing abstracts? Because to the best of my knowledge, no. There is no one standard format. Thank you.
Wait until we get other questions and comments. Okay.
Yes. Of course, there is no standard format, whatever, but there are suggestions, recommendations, So, for example, like I've given the one that Bhatia has suggested, and also Swales also came up with a suggestion of the moves, they call it in writing abstract, which is IMRG, Introduction, Method, Research, and Discussion. And other people as well, they came up, but these are all suggestions, like I said, like for example, you have a very novice writers, first time writing abstracts, for example, then it's easy if they have followed these texts. But of course, like I said, there are a lot of criticisms about genre analysis because it's too stacked, follow this one. That's why teachers are not supposed to be rigid in following all these texts, be it in academic writing or in business writing. Business writing as well, they have steps for example, letter of application that Bhatia has come up with. But there is no right or wrong. As long as you have summarized the content of, let's say, the research article or your thesis and so on. Yeah, I agree with you.
Well, thank you very much. And I would like to apologize for Dr. Suafis, a wonderful student of your own university, a wonderful researcher, and a wonderful professor. Sorry for being late. Well, thank you for the session, and I think now we will turn to our my soulmate, Professor Rajal Khandi.